There's a wooden bird sitting on my windowsill right now as I tell you this. I carved it 7 years ago and forgot about it within the hour. She kept it for 7 years. And the day she finally told me why, standing in the middle of my driveway with a silver suitcase and nowhere left to go, I realized the woman I should have noticed a long time ago had been sitting at the end of my dinner table the entire time. This is the story of the door I almost didn't open, and everything that walked through it. I was wiping linseed oil into a half-finished walnut tabletop when I heard suitcase wheels grinding against gravel. My name is Caleb Whitfield. I'm 39. I restore antique furniture out of a workshop behind a farmhouse I bought with the wreckage of my marriage money. White siding, black iron fence. A meadow rolling back into a wall of maple trees outside Lexington, Virginia. I opened the glass door of the workshop, still in my sawdust-covered shirt. And there, standing in the middle of the path lined with wild roses, was Lily, my ex-wife's younger sister. A woman I hadn't seen in 3 years. She was quietly beautiful in the way that sneaks up on you, leaning slightly, eyes red but dry, a silver suitcase resting against her ankle. She said very softly, "I have nowhere left to go, Caleb." I had closed the door on that entire family 3 years ago. That morning, I opened more than just one door again. Let me back up. I was married to Lily's older sister, Vanessa, for 7 years. She wanted Manhattan. She wanted parties, lights, noise that never stopped. I wanted wood grain and quiet mornings, and a child she said she wasn't ready for. 3 years ago, she signed the divorce papers inside 48 hours and flew to Miami with a man named Reed. I took the settlement money, drove south into Virginia, and learned how to cook dinner for one person without it feeling like punishment. I don't hate Vanessa. I'm just tired of her. There's a difference, and that difference is what kept me sane those first lonely months. My days follow a rhythm now, up at 5:30, coffee, into the workshop while the grass is still wet. Work until noon, sandwich on the back porch watching the meadow stretch toward the trees. It's not glamorous, it's mine. I remembered Lily from the first family dinner I ever sat through with Vanessa's relatives. She was 26 then, far end of the table, the kind of quiet that listens. She didn't say much that night. She only smiled when I told the story of an old jointer plane that jammed and threw a curl of pine straight into my coffee. Later that evening, after Vanessa had snapped at me in front of her parents over something I can't even remember now, Lily passed me in the hallway and asked, very softly, "Are you okay?" I had completely forgotten that. Until the morning she showed up on my porch and reminded me without saying a word. I invited her inside, poured her a glass of cold water. She sat in the old armchair near the window, hands folded tight in her lap, suitcase resting beside her ankles. "Does Vanessa know you're here?" I asked. She shook her head. "What about Patrick, her fiancé?" She was quiet for a long moment, looking at her shoes. "He knows," she said finally. "He's the reason I'm here." I didn't press. I've lived long enough to know some sentences need air before they're ready to finish themselves. I went to put the kettle on. When I came back, she was searching her suitcase pocket for a tissue, and a small object slipped out and rolled across my pine floorboards, straight to my boot. I bent down and picked it up. A tiny wooden sparrow, no bigger than my thumb. The varnish worn down to bare grain along its back. I knew that carving. I knew the angle of those wing cuts. They were mine. I didn't say anything. I set the bird on the table between us. Her face went red. She slipped it back into her pocket without meeting my eyes. I thought that evening would be one night. One dinner, one quiet condolence about a broken engagement. I thought by sunrise she'd be gone, the way she always seemed to disappear from every room she entered. I was wrong about almost everything that followed. Lily stayed. I made up the spare bedroom at the top of the stairs, the one I'd once meant to be a child's room and never finished. Soft cream walls. An unused crib mattress leaning behind the closet door that neither of us mentioned. She set her suitcase at the foot of the bed, took the wooden sparrow out of her pocket, and placed it carefully on the windowsill where it could catch the morning light. Then she turned to me and said, "Thank you," so quietly I almost missed it. I stood in the doorway a second longer than I should have. Because the way she set that bird down looked like someone finishing a journey, not starting one. The first week passed slow, the way wood takes shape under your hands. Lily rose earlier than I expected. She made pour-over coffee exactly the way I liked it, bloom at 30 seconds, pour spiraling outward from the center. I had never told her that. She read on the porch while I worked, never turned her phone on, never mentioned Patrick, never mentioned Vanessa. She moved through the house like someone who already knew the floor plan in her sleep, though I had never given her a tour. On the third day, I was fixing a loose hinge on her bedroom door. She came up the stairs with a screwdriver I hadn't asked for, and when she handed it to me, our fingers touched. We both pulled back too fast. Neither of us said a word about it. She turned to fix a curtain that didn't need fixing. I tightened a screw that was already tight. We stood there, 3 feet apart, in that small, careful silence, until I cleared my throat and went downstairs to look for a hinge pin I didn't actually need. I sat in the workshop afterward and waited for my hands to stop shaking. On the 4th day, she brought lunch out to the workshop, set it on the stool beside my bench. Walked back to the house before I could thank her. She'd cut the sandwich into 2 perfect triangles, the way my mother used to. I ate it slowly, sitting in the wood shavings, not understanding why that small gesture felt like the most attended to I'd been in years. On the 5th day, I caught her standing in front of the bookshelf, looking at the only photograph of Vanessa I hadn't put away. A group wedding photo, Lily in the corner in a pale green bridesmaid dress, hands folded. She wasn't looking at her sister in the picture. She was looking at herself. At the girl in the corner she used to be, the way a person looks at a witness they haven't spoken to in years. On the 6th night, a storm rolled in and the power went out. I lit 2 candles in the living room, set them between us on the coffee table. Rain hammered the metal roof. For the first time, Lily talked and didn't stop for almost an hour. She taught 3rd grade in a small town for 7 years. She'd once wanted to apprentice with an old woodworker, but her father had said no daughter of his was going to wear an apron for a living. I laughed. Your father didn't like me for the same reason. She looked at me a long time, candlelight moving across her face. I know, she said. I still thought she was here because her engagement had ended. I told myself the long looks were exhaustion. I told myself the way her eyes lingered on my back, while I planed a board, was nothing more than a tired woman watching steady motion, because steady motion was what she needed. But anyone watching from the outside would have seen what I refused to see. She knew where I kept the linseed oil, 3rd drawer down, where I'd moved it and never told anyone. She knew I always sat in the right-hand chair at the table. She knew which mug was mine, the heavy gray one with the chipped handle, and set it in front of me every morning without asking. The wooden sparrow stood on her windowsill every single day. I saw her wipe the dust off it once with the corner of her sleeve before coming down for coffee. She didn't know I'd seen. She held it in her palm for a long second, set it down with the care a person uses for something that has survived a long time. I went back downstairs without the tape measure I'd come for. I sat in the kitchen and tried to remember when I'd carved that bird. It came back slowly. A holiday 6 years ago in her parents' kitchen. I'd been whittling a scrap of wood at the counter, while the women argued in the dining room. Lily had passed by, looked at the curls of wood on the cutting board, and said, "That's pretty." I'd finished it on a whim and handed it to her. I'd forgotten about it within the hour. She had not. One night near 11, her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and her face changed. She walked out to the porch. I caught 2 sentences before she lowered her voice. "Stop calling Patrick." I told you the real reason. I didn't ask her about it when she came back inside. She didn't offer. She sat at the other end of the couch, hands wrapped around tea that had gone cold, watching the dark line of the meadow through the screen door. "I'm sorry the phone keeps ringing in your house," she said finally. "Lily, it's your phone." She looked at me with something close to gratitude, and I had to look down at my book to keep from saying something I'd regret. The next afternoon, sorting through a box of brass drawer pulls, she asked without looking up, "Have you ever wondered why I left Vanessa's wedding halfway through? I thought you were sick." She shook her head. "I wasn't sick, I just couldn't sit there and watch." "Watch what?" She didn't answer. She stood up, walked to the sink, washed 2 cups that were already clean. I sat there with drawer pulls scattered in my lap, not understanding what she hadn't said. I would understand it 3 weeks later, and I would feel like a fool. By the end of the 2nd week, she called me Caleb for the first time. Not Mr. Whitfield. Not the polite distance of a name attached to her sister's last name. Just Caleb asterisk called from the kitchen, the way you call someone whose name has lived in your mouth a long time. I stood in the workshop doorway and let it land. That night she asked if she could stay 2 more weeks. I said yes too fast. I told myself over and over she's your ex-wife's sister. That's all, that's all. I didn't sleep that night. I heard her footsteps pass my door and stop, exactly 3 seconds, before they kept moving down the hall. I counted those 3 seconds in the dark. And I knew whatever was happening in this house was no longer something I could pretend was nothing. Saturday morning, a white Range Rover came up the gravel and stopped under the maples. I knew the sound of that engine before I knew the woman driving it. Vanessa stepped out the way only Vanessa steps out of a car, door swung wide, sunglasses pushed up into her hair like a tiara. Her voice carried over the meadow before she'd even reached the porch. She'd flown in for what she called a family event, and somewhere along the way heard that Lily had stopped answering her phone. "Caleb," she said, climbing the path with a smile I remembered from a dozen dinner parties. "Repairing something that belongs to my family again, are we?" The sentence had 2 layers. I didn't bite. I held the door open, asked if she wanted coffee. My hands were steady. That, more than anything, surprised me. 3 years ago, her voice could shake me from across a room. Now it sounded like weather, the kind you wait out from inside. She walked my floor the way a buyer walks a property she's already decided not to bid on. Eyes touching the photos on the mantel, the throw on the couch, the half-drunk cup of tea Lily had left by the armchair. She didn't miss any of it. She turned the smile on Lily, standing very still by the window. "Sweetheart," Vanessa said, "I told you. Patrick told the whole family already. You cannot keep running into my ex-husband's house every time your life falls apart." Lily didn't answer, didn't even look up. Her right hand moved to her left wrist the way it did when she was bracing for something. I noticed. Vanessa noticed me noticing. Her smile sharpened by a 1/4 degree. She pulled out her phone. Scrolled with the certainty of someone who'd rehearsed this on the entire drive north. Turned the screen and slid it across the kitchen counter toward me, the slow, practiced push of a lawyer setting down evidence. A text message, 5 years old. From Lily to Vanessa, sent late on a Christmas night after too much wine. "Sis, I'm sorry, I can't stop thinking about him. I will carry it the rest of my life. Please don't be angry with me. I read it once, then again." Vanessa crossed her arms. "Read it, Caleb. My sweet little sister has been quietly in love with you for 7 years. Why do you think Patrick called off the engagement?" He read her journal. I set the phone down. I didn't look at Lily. I looked at Vanessa and I spoke very quietly. "You didn't come here because you're worried about your sister. You came here because you can't stand the idea that someone has loved me in a way you never did." Vanessa laughed, dry, no humor in it. "You still think you're special?" "No," I said. "I just think you're still the same." Lily stood in the center of the living room, hands crossed at her waist. She didn't deny it, didn't cry. Didn't beg me to listen. She only looked at me very calmly and said, "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." There was no fear in her voice, no shame either, which surprised me more. It was the voice of a person who had already paid the price of the secret, year after year, alone, and could not be charged for it twice. She walked toward the stairs. I went to the foot of the staircase and put my hand on the banister. I didn't block her exactly, I just stood there. She stopped on the 3rd step. Her eyes met mine and didn't look away. Vanessa raised her voice. "Let her go, Caleb. What is this? Are you going to marry my sister? Make yourself the joke of the whole town?" I turned to face her. For the first time in 7 years of knowing her, 3 years of being free of her, I spoke without softening any edges. "Vanessa, 3 years ago you signed those papers in 48 hours. You didn't ask what I wanted. You took the money and left. You don't get to decide who's allowed to stand in this room anymore." Her face changed for half a second. Then she covered it. She looked past me to the windowsill where the wooden sparrow stood in the late morning light, walked over, picked it up, turned it in her fingers like courtroom evidence. "You still keep these little toys around?" she said, laughing without warmth. "God, Caleb, some men go gray, you went sentimental." I crossed the room and took it gently from her hand. "That's not mine." I walked to the stairs and held it out. Lily came down 2 steps. Her hand trembled when she took it from me. She closed her fingers around it, the way someone closes their hand around the only thing they have left. Vanessa watched it land in her own face. The small, private knowledge that the bird was never the toy she'd thought it was. That something had been built between her sister and the man she used to call her husband, while she'd been busy being elsewhere. She made one last sound, a sharp breath through her nose. "You'll both regret this." The Range Rover tore long furrows through the gravel on the way out. I didn't watch her go. The house was very quiet after that. Lily wouldn't look at me. I didn't say anything. I went into the kitchen and made 2 cups of tea the slow way with loose leaves. I set one in front of her. "Tonight you sleep in your room," I said. "Tomorrow we talk," she nodded once. That heavy perfume Vanessa always wore hung in the air for hours, making my throat feel narrow. Sometime after midnight, I heard Lily crying through the wall. Very small, not sobbing, just breathing in a way that breaks something quiet inside the person listening. I lay in the dark and tried to remember the last time I'd cried. I couldn't. The next morning, I was up before the sun. Lily was already on the back porch, coffee held in both hands. Mist lay in long ribbons across the meadow. The wooden sparrow stood at the center of the small table between us like a witness. "I've been awake since 3, she said, almost to herself. I sat down across from her. The chair creaked. Neither of us spoke for a long minute, then she spoke first. "I didn't come here only because of Patrick," she said. "After he called off the engagement, I stood in the middle of my apartment for 3 days and I realized something. I wasn't sad about losing him. I was sad because I'd been pretending for 7 years. I don't have nowhere to go because I ran out of money. I have nowhere to go because there's only one place I've ever wanted to be, and I never had the right to come." I didn't answer right away. I looked at the sparrow. I looked at the meadow. I thought about all the years I hadn't seen what was sitting at the end of the dinner table. I thought about how the kindest people in a room are often the ones who say the least. "Lily," I said, "I've been divorced 3 years. I never knew you thought of me like that. And if I had known back then, when I was still married to your sister, I'm not sure I would have been kind enough to leave it alone. I want to believe I would have. I'm not certain. And I'm old enough now to be honest with you about that." She nodded slowly. "I know, that's why I never said it. I wanted you to keep being the kind man you were," I told her. "I can't let you stay here as the ex-sister-in-law with nowhere else to go. That's not fair to you. And I can't tell you I love you in the same week Vanessa threw your past at my front door. Neither of those would be honest. You deserve a sentence from me that wasn't bought with a fight." She watched, didn't interrupt. "Go back," I said. "Finish the school year, teach your kids, I'll be here. If after 3 months you still want this, come back. Not because you have nowhere else, because you choose this. Because the door you walked through is the one you actually wanted to find." That was when she cried, the first time in the whole story, not loud. Just a few quiet tears she didn't wipe away, the way someone sets down a weight they've carried so long they forgot it was a weight. "Are you afraid I won't come back?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "But I'm more afraid of you coming back because there was no other door." She packed slowly that afternoon, folded her dresses, her books, left the wooden sparrow standing on the windowsill. "You're not taking it?" I asked. "I've kept it for 7 years," she said. "It's your turn." I drove her to the train station that evening. The field slid past, green and silver, radio playing soft underneath us. Near a small town along the way, she reached over and rested 2 fingers on the back of my wrist where it lay on the gear shift. She didn't look at me. I didn't look at her. She kept her hand there for half a mile, then folded it back into her lap. At the platform, she turned to me before stepping onto the train. "Caleb," she said, "I don't need you to promise me anything. I just need you not to close that door again." I nodded. The train pulled away. I stood on the platform a long time after it was gone. I drove home to an empty house. For the first time in 3 years, the silence wasn't a comfort. The wooden sparrow stood on my own windowsill now. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, holding the bird in my palm the way she had, learning the weight of waiting. The first month went by like a long work day. I sent her a small handmade box, dovetailed in pine, with a single block of walnut inside, cut from the underside of the table she used to sit at for breakfast. No letter, no return address. 3 weeks later, a postcard arrived. Her handwriting on the back, she didn't sign it, she didn't have to. Vanessa called one evening from Miami, engaged again to read. "I just wanted you to know I'm okay," she said, in the tone of someone who needs you to believe a thing more than she needs you to be happy for her. Congratulations, Vanessa. I hung up and waited for some old feeling to rise. It didn't. The name had finally become a neutral sound, like a street I no longer drove down. A week later, Patrick sent a long email, full of the word asterisk, very few mentions of Lily. He said he understood the engagement had been a mistake. I didn't answer. The silence felt cleaner than any sentence I could have written. The third month, a job came up 2 hours from where Lily taught. I didn't tell her I'd be close. I drove up, checked into a small hotel, spent 2 days working. On the second night, I walked past the school where she taught, lights still on in the hallway. Through the window, I could see her cleaning a chalkboard with slow, patient strokes, someone in no hurry to get home. I stood across the street a long time. I didn't knock on the window. Didn't call her name. I went back to the hotel and I gave myself the rest of the month. 3 days before the end of the third month, I heard small suitcase wheels on gravel. I was in the workshop. I came out wiping my hands. Lily stood at the head of the path, exactly where she'd stood that first day in June, except this time she carried a small overnight bag instead of the silver case. I opened the door the same way. I came because I chose to come, she said. I didn't say a word. I came down the porch steps, put my arms around her. For the first time, she exhaled into my shoulder like she'd been holding her breath for 7 years. I held her in the middle of the wild roses for as long as it took both our hands to stop trembling. The next summer, the porch looked different. Lily moved in slowly the way she did everything. A box of books one weekend, a small painting the next. She taught at the village school nearby, 15 minutes on foot from the front door. I built her a slanted drafting table by the south window for the children's book she'd started illustrating. She published the first one that fall. The dedication page read, "For the carver." On our bedroom windowsill, the original wooden sparrow still stood. Beside it now, a second one, slightly smaller, carved on her birthday from a piece of cherry wood I'd been saving for years. She cried when I set it down, then laughed at herself for crying. Then held my hand against her cheek. For a long, quiet minute I will remember for the rest of my life. 2 years after she came back on a quiet Tuesday morning, she set a cup of ginger tea in front of me instead of coffee. I looked up. She smiled, didn't have to say anything. I stood up and put my hand on her stomach very lightly. We stayed like that a long time, dawn lifting the edge of the meadow into color. "I was going to wait until tonight to tell you," she finally said. "You didn't have to," I said. "I knew the second you set down the cup." 4 years after the morning she first walked up that gravel path, our daughter was 3 years old. She ran across the back porch that afternoon, barefoot, carrying the smallest of 3 wooden sparrows in her tiny fist. I'd carved that one the week she was born, scrap of maple smaller than the first 2, one wing tucked away, the way newborn things tuck themselves. Lily sat beside me on the porch swing I'd built one winter, her head against my shoulder, the meadow stretching gold and green toward the maples. Bees moving over the wild, roses the way they had that very first morning. I thought then about the morning 3.5 years earlier, when she'd stood in the middle of those roses with a silver suitcase and said, "I have nowhere left to go." For a long time I believed it was a cry for help. I understood now. It had been the quietest confession of love I'd ever been given. I had opened a door once for a woman with nowhere left to go. I didn't know that day I was also opening a door for myself to come home. I used to believe love had to come from someone new, someone with no connection to the part of my life I wanted to forget. I was wrong. Sometimes the right person was there the whole time, sitting at the far end of the table, watching you get hurt, waiting 7 years for the right to speak. Sometimes the sentence, "I have nowhere left to go asterisk," is the bravest thing a quiet person knows how to say. There are doors you close to protect yourself. And there's one door, if you're brave enough to open it again, that leads you back to exactly where you were always meant to be. If someone has loved you quietly for years and never said a word, do you think that makes them weak or the strongest person you've ever known? Tell me in the comments. And if Caleb and Lily's story touched you tonight, tap that like button so I know stories like this deserve to keep being told. Subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. I'll see you in the next story, Blue Heart.